Welcome everybody to the Plug and Play Tech Center. Thank you all for coming out and joining us this evening. We are very happy to have you. Tonight we are doing our mobile meetup on mobile payments. So we're going to have a couple presenters talking about practical considerations in mobile payments, so just the sort of things that you want to think about as you begin to design your own payment system and your own processes and best practices for your company. We're going to have our second presenter is going to focus it a little bit more on mobile, and then we're going to go into a panel that features some of the popular payment providers out there. We have PayPal, Amazon, Google, and Zong, who does a lot of mobile payments, and who's actually a plug-and-play company. So without any further ado, I'd like to introduce our first presenter, Jason Thrasher of BitMenu. If we could give him a warm round of applause.
Thanks so much, Nick. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak this evening. And I'm really excited that so many people are attending with us tonight. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the way that BitMenu is using payment platforms and to achieve a good mobile experience. So I'm the CTO and co-founder, one of the co-founders at BitMenu. And I'm also a hands-on software engineer at BitMenu and have written most of the application to your code. So I'd be glad to answer any questions people have after I give the talk. So first, what's the agenda? We're going to talk about what BitMenu is so you guys have a little bit of a context. We're able to talk about mobile payments in the context of having actually implemented a solution and having gone production with that solution. So I'll give you some insights into the things that we actually had to evaluate in that process. I'm going to talk about what options there are today for mobile payments. I'm not going to make it comprehensive, but just kind of allude to some of the things that you should think about when thinking about integrating mobile payments into your system, as well as how we've actually gone to market with our own design considerations in that process. All right, so first, what is BitMenu? BitMenu is a service, is a platform layer that allows content providers to sell digital content to anybody. And they can do that across any device on any platform, be it mobile, be it web, be it Google TV, be it anything. So we are a white label solution. We are not actually like a store. You wouldn't come to bitmenu.com and search for content at all. You would actually go to one of the content providers and see that there's content that you're interested in and say, hey, that's a reasonable price. I want to transact and buy that content. If you're a buyer, you go through the pay flow through our system, and then you would get fulfillment of that content to your device. So in a nutshell, we're tying the purchase experience, the payment experience, the offer of content for sale from the seller to the fulfillment, right? So let's go through a quick demo of how we do that before we get into our considerations, just so you understand the context. So here's an iPhone with an offer for sale. I know this is small for the people in the back, but we have there's a button there that says checkout with Amazon, which is one of our payment platforms that we support. And when you click on that button, you immediately go through to the login experience. That's a mobile login experience for Amazon Flexible Payment Service. You log in and see the amount, and you click on confirm for the amount. This is $4 in this case. And then you go through to a fulfillment. Here, we show a fulfillment screen from an iPad that we had. Here, the content's being delivered directly into iBooks. Okay, so the content was an EPUB file that was for sale for $4. So what do we consider in that process? Well, there's a lot of stuff that's available in the mobile payment space. It's really exploding. It's actually really exciting to be in there and evaluating all of that. Carrier billing is kind of the traditional mode for making payments in mobile. Java games were something that existed like 10 years ago across many different devices. It's a very standard setup for carriers to bill directly to the customers. App stores now have come on the scene with the iPhone. You see people selling content in the App Store quite a bit. There are lots of different app stores. There's also an Android marketplace. Amazon's about to launch an app store, and Barnes & Noble has their own Nook, which is another implementation of the Android app store. And then there's also payment platforms. So payment platforms are things like PayPal, things like Amazon's Flexible Payment Service, and even things like Google Checkout on top of Chrome Web Store. These can all be used to transact in mobile. Let's talk a little bit about mobile carrier payment options. It's very confusing in this space because each one of them has different rules, different processes, different technical requirements for performing transactions. Across the board, all of the carriers basically keep their customer information. So if you're selling a content, you won't have access to knowing who the buyer is. You don't get their name, you don't get their email address, you don't know anything about them. The carrier maintains the store. They're going to be splitting the revenue with you about 50-50 generally. It varies by carrier. And it's a process where there's really no standards right now. So if you develop your app for one store, it may not be deployable on another, and you have to maintain the differences between each of those stores within your system. All right, let's talk a little bit about the Apple App Store. It is huge. There's 300,000 plus apps in there. There's a lot of people that are buying stuff. It's a very seamless, beautiful user experience. There's a lot of apps in there, so you're competing with a lot of other people to sell your content. Again, you're not getting any customer data through that system, so you don't know who your buyers are. Discovery can happen if the customer is motivated to go do a search in the App Store for content. Let's say you want to find a financial app to manage your personal finances. You can go do a search for finance, find one of the apps, probably of a few hundred that are available there, and purchase it in the store. Or you could buy it. Let's say you go to intuit.com and you see there's a finance app that you want to buy. You can say, hey, there's a link to an app that I can buy in the App Store. You click on that link, you go into the App Store and make your purchase. They take 30% of your transaction fee, of course. This is pretty well known. The problem is that you have to develop directly for the iPhone platform. You have to use their tooling. You have to do everything in the Apple vertically integrated infrastructure. So there are lots of other payment options too, as far as mobile goes with native apps. The Android marketplace is a good example, but there's lots of other Android marketplaces, Amazon and Nook I alluded to earlier. These are growing. The device install base is growing very fast. If you're thinking of what customers will be able to purchase my app, you should definitely be considering Android and developing for that platform. Again, it's a native platform. You're compiling specifically for that device. So one of the things that is really important to consider is, App Store, marketplace versus other options. What are the other options? So app stores are very vertically integrated. Native apps are going to be platform specific, and as such, they're going to be segregated by market. So if I have an iPhone app, I cannot run it on my Android device and vice versa. So if I'm starting a company and thinking about what kind of content I'm going to deploy into those places, I have to now support multiple platforms if I'm going to go with a native app of some kind. And that's a concern if you have limited resources for developers that can build those apps. Compare that to payment platforms. Typically, the payment platforms have at least a native implementation, but they also have a web implementation. And one of the apps that's ubiquitous across all of the mobile devices is a web browser. And so if you standardize on the web browser as the mode of payment for that system in mobile, then you'll be able to do any transaction on any device anywhere. And that's great if you're thinking about building and starting off from scratch. If you can deploy using web browsers to start your transactions, you'll be able to service every customer. Problem is that you have to build out the fulfillment infrastructure. All right, so one of the things I was told when starting to research some of this stuff was that payments are not sexy. Payments are definitely sexy, okay? Getting paid is a good thing, right? Sometimes we forget that in Silicon Valley. Payments, typically can come from different places. One of the places that people think of getting revenue from is advertising. The problem with advertising is that you need lots of traffic to be able to make money off of advertising. And I think there's lots of different places you can look for metrics on this, but 1 million page views per month might pay the salary of somebody at $40,000 a year. That typically doesn't float a company. So you need to do more than that. So if you do make enough, if you do have enough people that are using your system, why can't you just charge them? Why can't you make it easy enough to fulfill the content to those people so that you can get a direct payment, not worry about advertising, and have a wonderful user experience as they're interacting with your content? So that's what BitMenu had considered seriously. And let's face it, if you're not getting paid, you don't have a business, right? So if you're developing like a GWiz app, you need to have a way to make money. So that gets to the GWiz app. There's a lot of people talking about building these great tools. There are a lot of developers building really neat and innovative things in mobile these days. The problem is they get featured on TechCrunch, and everyone's talking about it, but TechCrunch rightly, points out, how is this guy going to make money? And so you've got to have a way to monetize. You really need to do that before you start. It shouldn't be an afterthought. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the costs in app stores. This is another aspect that you need to consider. How much is it going to cost for me to do transactions in these environments? In the iTunes App Store, it's 30%. They pay, I think typically it's like net 30, so you're getting paid in arrears. Android Marketplace, it's the same thing. The Amazon store is a little bit different. They haven't launched yet. You can't buy anything there yet, but they have announced their pricing policy. And that is that they are giving the developer 70% of the list price of the application, or 20% of the list price if they sell it at a different price. So Amazon actually controls the pricing on the Amazon Android store that's about to launch. And that's interesting because let's just take an example. If you're selling a $10 item, you can make $7 off of a sale. Or if they discount it down to $1, you can make 20 cents. So that's a big concern. The Nook is another area of interest. They haven't announced their pricing yet, but it's something that's really going to be interesting because it's an Android-specific, reader-specific platform for content. Actually, I think I made an error on the Amazon pricing model. It's 20% of list price. So if it's a $10 app and they're selling it for $1, you should still get $2, just to make sure that I give them the right amount. So in a nutshell, one of the things you got to look for is the fact that these are all card-on-file systems. So card-on-file systems are systems that allow the buyer to make a transaction without it entering lots of detail about that transaction or about themselves. So they don't have to enter their shipping information, for example. They don't have to create a user account. They've already done that implicitly because they're interacting. They have this device. They have an iPhone. They have an Android device. Let's look at payment platforms in the same context. So PayPal, Amazon Payments, and Google's Checkout, which is used for the Chrome Web Store, all of these have about the same pricing model, above $10. So if you're selling content above $10, it's going to be 2.9% plus 30 cents from the transaction fees. If you're below that, PayPal and Amazon Payments both support a digital pricing model so that it's a lot less expensive to sell that digital content. And again, these are card-and-file systems. So the difference between these and the app stores is that you're authenticating not to a native piece of infrastructure on the device. You're doing it in a web experience somewhere, or you're doing it using a plug-in toolkit that might be part of a native API. And that's really important because card-on-file systems allow that seamless user experience that allows lots of transactions to go through the system. You really need to think about that. Shopping carts, like the old-style way of doing e-commerce, really don't work at all in these environments. You have to have card-on-file. So Apple only requires a password. PayPal and Amazon, as I said, just require a username and password in one click. All right, content delivery considerations. This is really important. How are you going to get the content to the user? This is where BitMenu, for our needs, had to put a lot of thought and work into. We need to get content that was for sale through our system to the buyers. So we know that there's native apps that you can compile for different devices. There's also web apps that can be delivered. In fact, one of the things that's important to reflect on is Steve Jobs told us when the iPhone launched that web was the platform that you should develop apps for. This is before you were allowed to actually install apps onto the iPhone. So the intention was, hey, it's HTML5. It's a rich, very well-supported web browser, being mobile Safari. Build apps for that. Well, you can still do that today, and you can do that certainly for Android. There's actually a third option for delivering content, and that's what BitMenu does. We actually support containers. So we don't actually deliver native apps to users. We deliver content into different containers that will work inside the mobile devices. So for example, a container that's web-based might be IBIS Reader, and IBIS Reader is a platform for reading ebooks. You actually have that reading experience online. You do it in the mobile web browser. Google Docs is another example. You can put any kind of file into Google Docs and play it back from anywhere on any device. It's a great, great infrastructure piece of to inject content into. And then native apps, if you have a scheme URL, you can actually invoke from a web page into Instapaper, Stanza, or Kindle. So there's lots of other ways to get content into the system. All right, so in summary, let's talk about BitMenu's design considerations, because this is kind of a use case example of payments in mobile. And so we're looking at having a mobile user experience for checking out that is using the web. And we're looking at having a payment platform as the component that's doing the transaction, handling the money for us. And then we're fulfilling content into containers on the devices that are available out there. So now let's drill into actually how we used all the considerations to execute our product. So in a nutshell, this is a typical mobile web pay flow. And this is kind of canonical. It's the same thing that would happen if you were actually buying your app like in the iTunes store. You just have different UI, right? So there's an offer that's for sale, and you have options for payment. Here it's Amazon checkout, or it's PayPal. You send the user to the payment platform, and then you return for fulfillment going to any device. So in PayPal's case, because they have some APIs that are really great to work with, PayPal allows you to send them through their system. You have to do a couple things before you send the user there. You have to do a couple things when you receive the user back in from the pay flow. So we send the user into the payment authorization. We have to create a payment authorization with an API call before we send the user to PayPal. Then the user goes into PayPal and does the transaction. When they return, we check the transaction details to make sure that the payment is clear. That's really important. In mobile, the user is going to expect an instant experience, right? If it's digital content that they're purchasing. They want to download and experience that content immediately. So you can't wait to bill like in batch mode, the traditional way that we used to do 10 years ago, at night or maybe next week. And then you fulfill the content. It's the same thing for Amazon. For Amazon Flexible Payments, we actually create a sign URL request, send the user into the Amazon Payments pay flow, and then we wait for an instant payment notification back from Amazon telling us the status. If we don't receive one within certain time frames, we actually poll Amazon's system to see whether or not the payment is successfully transacted. If it has, we send them on to the fulfillment flow. Now, I don't cover any of the edge cases in here. I'd be glad to talk to you about that afterwards if you have questions. All right, so here's another consideration you have to take if you're going to build into payment platform infrastructure. You have to have a ledger. Maybe you don't need a ledger if you're only going to integrate with, say, PayPal, because you can go to PayPal's website and see all of your transactions in their system. But if you're going to integrate with more than one payment platform, you need to have a ledger locally. And what does a ledger do? Well, it basically tells you how much money you made and who you moved money between, what parties. So these are the basic structures that you need. You need a date, you need an order ID, you need an amount, a recipient, and a sender. This is very low-level stuff, but it's really important to know that it's not hard, and it lets you know how well you're doing. That's sexy. All right, let's talk a little bit about refunds. Refunds and supporting refunds, if you integrate with payment platforms, are a required part of your launch. So if a buyer goes through a process where they do a transaction, maybe they don't like the content that they actually purchased for some reason, you need to refund that user. You need to support that user in some way. So you need to support the refund. But that might happen within, like, say, 12 hours or 24 hours of the transaction. What happens in 6 months? What happens in 6 months when the buyer comes back and has a complaint or has a question, or maybe somebody realized something was wrong and you need to roll that thing back? Well, you actually have to support the refund way into the future as well. And so this is something where you have to build out something that takes in potentially a notification from a third-party system. Let's say somebody goes to PayPal and says, hey, I need to request a refund from this transaction 6 months ago. PayPal's system generates an instant payment notification, which is sent back to the BitMenu system. We actually update our ledger with that refund information so that we can keep our ledger in sync with PayPal's. So this is a little low-level technical detail stuff, but an order is not equal to a payment. And this is, if you're designing a system from scratch, is something to definitely consider. An order is a representation of what was offered for sale, the party that is purchasing it, possibly the seller that's involved in that transaction, the price, the date, and all that stuff. The order goes through a bunch of states in its life cycle. The payments are attached to that order. This is just a way to simplify the modeling of the transactional system. The payments also go through those states. So these are actually the states that we use in our production system to transact orders and payments, and refunds are treated the same way. So pre-created, created, initiated, completed, refunded, and if it's a fraudulent order, it would be an invalid order. All right, so in summary, each payment platform has different technical and business constraints that need to be considered if you're going to go this route. And it works across any device if you do. And the technical constraints can definitely be normalized into a implementation that allows you to have one code base to implement them all. So I hope I was able to give you some good information.